Hi everyone. Thank you for joining us today. In this video, we're going to be reacting to a documentary. The documentary is on truth about white slaves, white slave trade. Okay, so we did one on the Irish slaves a little while back, and I've always said I was going to do one on the white slaves as well, because there seemed to be this narrative in the world we live in right now that slavery only happened to certain group of people. And the problem now is that by consistently pushing that narrative, what we end up doing is actually, you know what, I'm gonna stop there. Let's check this out. Let me see if it's gonna match up with what I was thinking in my head. I've got in my head. All right. I want to, before we begin, I'm going to give a quick shout out to Forgotten History. This is where I'm getting this from. So a massive shout out to them for posting this. I haven't seen it before, so we're going to be seeing it for the first time together. So without any further ado, let's go.
Slavery is as old as human civilization, dating back beyond recorded history, and it exists even still today. Every culture on every continent practiced some form of slavery, whether it was serfdom, indentured servitude, or collective peasantry. However, when the slave trade is mentioned, people normally think of the black African slave trade to the Western Hemisphere during the colonial period from 1500 to the mid-1800s, as practiced by the European colonial powers. Estimates range from 10 to 13 million Africans being brought to the New World, with around 10 million surviving to be sold in North and South America, as well as in the Caribbean islands. Of this number, the best estimate is that 450,000 went to the British, French, and Spanish colonies in what is now the United States and Caribbean. Brazil alone received almost 5 million, the rest going to the Spanish colonies in South America.
Wow.
Slavery still exists in the world, yet most of the major powers ignore the fact and refuse to even acknowledge that it still exists. It is still quite active. Yet, 6 decades before the American Civil War, a war was fought by the United States on foreign shores to try and...
Yeah, but one thing quickly is it still exists. And yes, there's been evidence of this as well. And there's been reports, wide reports of this, of people being sold on apps and stuff like that in certain countries. But yet nobody is talking about it. Why don't we ask ourselves the question, why? Why don't we talk about it?
Powers ignore the fact and refuse to even acknowledge that it still exists. It is still quite active. Yet, 6 decades before the American Civil War, a war was fought by the United States on foreign shores to try and stop the white slave trade. What was the white slave trade? Does it still exist? Who were the Barbary pirates? What was the result of American intervention? How did it occur, and what was the aftermath? And how did 9 U.S. Marines and their mercenaries make history and give birth to a legendary fighting force while also ending the white slave trade in North Africa?
Oh.
Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former soldier, Marine Corps scout sniper, history professor, historian, and book author. And we will answer these questions and other issues on this segment of Forgotten History.
During the late 18th and early 19th centuries, the world was on fire, as France and Britain were engaged in the Napoleonic Wars, which was another series of conflicts just like the 7 Years' War, again involving every nation in Europe. The 7 Years' War was also known as the French and Indian War in the United States. Both these conflicts were fought on every continent and on every ocean and in every colony. Even during these protracted wars, the transatlantic slave trade continued. It was big business. While the European powers were destroying each other, Thomas Jefferson became the third president of the United States from March 4th, 1801 to March 4th, 1809, and he had several major issues to contend with. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 from France doubled the size of the United States. The Yazoo territorial disputes in western Georgia were hotly contested. The launching of the Lewis and Clark expedition in 1804 to explore the newly acquired country, and the contested issue of slavery. In 1806, Jefferson denounced the international slave trade as a violation of human rights and called upon Congress to criminalize it. Congress responded by approving the act prohibiting importation of slaves the following year. No longer could slaves be brought from Africa, although slavery was still legal in the United States. Then there were also the rising tensions between the United States and Great Britain, which dominated the final years of Jefferson's second term, as the Royal Navy had been seizing American merchant ships and impressing sailors. However, one situation which has gone largely unnoticed in history was Jefferson being the first president to send the military overseas into direct action: the war against the Barbary pirates. For decades prior to Jefferson's accession to office, the Barbary Coast pirates of North Africa had been capturing foreign merchant and warships, stealing their valuable cargoes and enslaving crew members, while often demanding huge ransoms for their release. Many of these ships and crews were American. Before independence, American merchant ships were protected from the Barbary pirates by the naval and diplomatic influence of Great Britain, which had threatened the use of military force should their ships be molested. However, that American protection came to an end after the colonies won their independence. The Barbary pirates also attacked the coastal northern Mediterranean, launching attacks against France, Italy, and Sicily, kidnapping women as white slaves, primarily and whenever possible, notable wealthy persons and ships for ransom. In their feverish search for white women slaves, a few pirates even went as far as the coast of Iceland, raiding inland to kidnap women and bring them back to North Africa. North African slave markets thrived, as, under Islamic law, known as Sharia, although fellow Muslims could not be enslaved, non-Muslims could be and were. Over a period of more than 300 years, it is estimated that 1 million white Europeans, to include those captured at sea as well as through land raids abroad, were enslaved. Many of these were Americans captured at sea. In 1794, in reaction to the attacks, Congress had passed a law authorizing the payment of tribute to the Barbary states. Part of that law was the Naval Act of 1794, which authorized the construction of 6 frigates, establishing the United States Navy. By the end of the 1700s, when Jefferson was Secretary of State, the United States had concluded treaties with all of the Barbary states, the Ottoman regencies of Algiers, Tunis, and Tripoli, along with independent Morocco. When Congress authorized $80,000 for Morocco to not molest American shipping, it was considered a good deal, as it was a cost savings when compared to the loss of ships, cargo, and sailors. The Bay of Algiers.
So what have I always said? It wasn't about the people. It was about business. It was business. Isn't it sad that people are willing to go to any length to enrich themselves? That includes getting hold of anybody who is considered to be valuable at that point in time.
For Morocco to not molest American shipping, it was considered a good deal, as it was a cost savings when compared to the loss of ships, cargo, and sailors. The Bey of Algiers, Mustafa Baba, also agreed, and many American merchantmen were escorted by Portuguese warships, as Portugal also had a treaty with the Islamic states. But Jefferson was opposed to paying tribute, which he considered to be a modern Danegeld. When Saxon England paid the Danish Vikings not to attack, it did not work. Although Morocco and Algiers initially agreed, just weeks before Jefferson took office, Tripoli began attacking American merchant ships in an attempt to extract further tribute. Jefferson had seen enough. Jefferson tried diplomacy, and his letter to Pasha Yusuf Karamanli emphasized, "Our sincere desire to cultivate peace and commerce with your subjects." Pasha Karamanli, the ruler of modern-day Tunisia, felt that the Americans had insulted him by not offering to pay tribute. He threatened continued actions if not so respected. Pasha Karamanli was already at war with Sweden, having broken an existing treaty after Sweden agreed to pay annual tribute and ransom for 131 captives. 14 Swedish merchantmen had been seized by Tripolitan corsairs. Some of these were white women who were being transported on Swedish merchantmen, and it is not known if they were ever recovered, as the white women were rarely ransomed. They were highly prized and sold. The Pasha then declared war on the United States on May 14, 1801 by chopping down the flagpole at the American consulate in Tripoli, a direct act of war. Jefferson sent 3 frigates and a schooner under the command of U.S. Navy Commodore Richard Dale as a show of force and to protect U.S. ships entering the Mediterranean through the Straits of Gibraltar. Dale learned of the declaration when he reached Gibraltar on July 1, 1801. From that point, Dale's ships blocked 2 of the Pasha's corsairs operating as raiders and messengers inside the harbor. Yusuf Karamanli was shocked at the American audacity. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, Selim III in Istanbul, was also less than amused, yet did not interfere when the Americans became involved. He had just concluded treaties with Russia and Austria and was trying to westernize his empire along Western lines. This included eliminating the white slave trade, and this position was not favored by many of his subordinate regional leaders, especially in North Africa, and they launched a revolt against him, and his cousin and successor, Mustafa IV, had him murdered in 1807. He was not about to give up such a lucrative business. The U.S. blockades halted Barbary trade and raids with Europe, but did not stop Tripoli's trade with the other Barbary states. It did, however, incite the other rulers, who considered siding with the Pasha, and they expelled their American diplomats. The United States was putting a major dent into their pirate enterprises, to include the white slave trade. The possibility of Tunis, Algiers, and Morocco joining forces as a result of losing this lucrative business became a serious concern during 1802, but in 1803, Captain Edward Preble was the new American naval commander, and he was aware of the white slave trade and piracy, and he began to deal with it. On September 12, 1803, the USS Constitution arrived off the Barbary coast to confront the Tripolitan pirates. In October 1803, the frigate USS Philadelphia ran aground and was attacked and seized, and the 307-man crew was held for ransom. In response, on February 16, 1804, a group under Navy Lieutenant Stephen Decatur slipped into Tripoli harbor after dark, boarded and set fires that destroyed the Philadelphia. The Pasha, in response, demanded an outrageous sum in ransom for his American hostages, even threatening death if it was not paid. In 1804, Commodore Samuel Barron, aboard the USS President, took command of 11 vessels, and he had new orders. But due to illness, he handed command of the squadron to Captain John Rogers. Jefferson had again seen enough and decided to take direct and immediate action. He sent the order. Ex-Consul William Eaton, a former Army captain who used the title of general, and United States Marine Corps First Lieutenant Presley O'Bannon would lead a force of 8 U.S. Marines and 500 mercenaries to take Derna and free any hostages. These mercenaries were Greeks from Crete, Arabs, and Berbers, opposed to the regime, and started on a march across the desert from Alexandria, Egypt in April 1805.
So we're using this is the thing again, isn't it? What's the best way to fight your opponent? Try and use people within their own network. Try and use people that are not in agreement with what's been done. But I suppose the problem here is that how come has this been able to kind of slide under the radar? Because this went on for years and years and years. But anytime you want to hear about slavery, let's talk about black
Marines
people.
and 500 mercenaries to take Derna and free any hostages. These mercenaries were Greeks from Crete, Arabs, and Berbers, opposed to the regime, and started on a march across the desert from Alexandria, Egypt in April 1805. Their objective was to capture the Tripolitan city of Derna. The Muslim troops were under the command of Egyptian Sheikh El-Tahib, the Ottoman Empire viceroy. William Eaton, who was overbearing and not very friendly, kept himself aloof from his men and was in overall command but leading only half the group. He had a tough job controlling the largely undisciplined mercenaries, and the infighting between the Christian Greeks and Muslims, few of whom were professional soldiers, became a problem. His promises of money and loot once they took Derna was looked upon skeptically. However, O'Bannon and his 8 Marines embedded with their mercenaries shared food, hardship, water, and earned their trust. O'Bannon decided to take the Muslims from Eton, exchanging them for his Greeks. The Marines built a strong fellowship by not denigrating the Islamic faith. They discussed their similarities and differences. O'Bannon also knew that many of these men had either been hostages themselves or had lost friends and family to the white slave trade. Eton reported in May 1805, quote, "Our only provisions are a handful of rice and 2 biscuits a day," end quote. From March 22nd to March 30th, several Arab mercenaries, under the command of Sheikh Hamid el-Tahib, staged mutinies. By April 8, when he crossed the border into Libya and Tripoli, Eton had quelled the Arab mutinies, but he could not stop the desertions. In late April, his army finally reached the port city of Bomba, some miles up the coast from Derna, where U.S. Navy warships USS Argus, Nautilus, and Hornet, with Commodore James Barron and Captain Isaac Hull, were waiting for him. Eton received fresh supplies and the money to pay his mercenaries. Argus gave an additional cannon to the troops. On April 26th, Captain Hull's ships then opened fire and bombarded Derna's batteries for an hour. Meanwhile, Eton divided his remaining army into 2 separate attacking parties. The attack began at 14:45 hours, with Lieutenant O'Bannon and his Marines leading the attack with 50 inexperienced Greek gunners. Eton's force was halted due to high volumes of enemy musket fire, but O'Bannon pushed his men through the inaccurate fire, as witnessed from the ships. Carefully interchanging his men into various ranks to fire, advance, reload, and continue the process, O'Bannon's force took the fort cannons. Eton, wounded in the left wrist, would report later that O'Bannon, with his Marines and Greeks, had, quote, passed through a shower of musketry from the walls of houses, took possession of the battery, end quote. Eton's forces caught up and turned the defenders' own abandoned guns against them, pushing them out of the city and into a well-placed ambush set up by O'Bannon just outside the main gate. During the entire battle, O'Bannon lost 2 men killed and 3 wounded Marines, with 9 of his mercenaries killed. Eton's losses among the Muslims is unknown. O'Bannon raised the flag over the captured city at 1600 hours. They had just defeated a force 4 times their number, who were in a fortified defensive posture, and for the first time in American history, that a flag from the United States had been raised on foreign soil. Hostages were freed, and the Navy sank the pirate ships in harbor. Accurate naval fire from Argus and the other ships forced them back, and Derna remained in American hands. Yusuf reluctantly signed a peace treaty on June 10, 1805, aboard the USS Constitution. The treaty granted American ships passage through the Mediterranean without further payments of tribute and freedom from harassment. This also meant joining the other European nations in halting the very active and overt white slave trade. The war was over, and so was active white slavery from North Africa. Marine Corps legend has it that Hamid presented O'Bannon with a Mameluke sword, a sign of prestige and power. Emboldened by this event, more European nations also increased their naval presence and resisted the Barbary pirates, stopped paying tribute, crippling their commercial trade and extortion rackets, ending their raids on southern coastal Europe, ending hostage-taking and their demand for ransoms and the white slave trade. Presley O'Bannon and his 8 Marines had done the seemingly impossible, but it would not be the last time Marines were called upon to do the impossible and succeed. Semper Fi.
We hope you enjoyed this segment of Forgotten History. Please click like and subscribe for free. And please stay tuned and be engaged and informed. Send us comments if you have questions or even show ideas, and we will respond to all requests and comments as soon as we can. Thank you.
Interesting. I think the last one I saw from these guys, I'm sure it was these guys that I saw the one from Irish slaves from as well. I believe the last one I saw, yeah, I'm trying to see if, yeah, it is them, Irish slaves. Yeah, forgotten history. It is from them as well. That's where I saw this one. But the problem I've got is that, which is the question I'm asking, is that who does it favor to ensure that we don't have an accurate account of what actually happened? So when we talk about slavery, a lot of the time we would focus on a certain group, like I said initially, and not and completely ignore other aspects of slavery and all the people that were involved in this. This was actually quite difficult to see because when I was watching the ones about the Irish slaves, what they said in that one, which I thought was actually quite powerful, the use of wordings or use of words, was that these people had agreed to be slaves. How do you agree to be a slave? How do you sign a contract to say, "Oh yeah, I'd love to be your slave"? How would any? It was volunteer. Okay, that's a way of kind of covering yourself. What is the alternative? You're put in a position where it was either you sign or you meet whatever fate is in front of you. Of course, if it's about choosing survival versus not being around anymore, anybody would sign a contract. It was a business. And yes, it was a business that neglected to see people as important, but instead as commodity. We see this with all other aspects of life as well. Whatever it is that is important at that point in time, it could be, for example, crude oil. That's the business of the time. Everybody goes after that. And what happens? Anybody that's in the way of that, those people have to pay. If it is about getting servants, everybody goes after that. There was a documentary that was done a little while ago on one of the Middle Eastern countries um, where there was an actual app being created where people are sold. This is well known. It was well documented, but it was ignored. People knew about this, but ignored it. Again, the question is, who does it benefit? If it benefits the society to ignore it, then they will. If it benefits the society to draw attention to it, then they will. And right now, the worry I have is that it continues to benefit society to create this division between groups of people to say, "Oh yeah, you were the ones that were most hurt by slavery, or you were the ones that were real slaves. So for that reason, you need to go out there and challenge and ask for retribution." Or what's the word for it? Repercussion? What, I'm trying to remember the word for it when you ask for money to be paid back for sins that were committed against your ancestors. I'm trying to remember the word for it. But my question is, like I asked before, if one tribe asks for that, then every tribe has to ask for it. We can't play favoritism. We is either we're paying one group. If we're paying one group, we pay all groups. Who's more valuable and why? I know back in certain countries in Africa, say for example, if where there are loads of deprivations and stuff like that, you would see all of this militant group. They would hold people hostages. Um, so that could be, and it happens. And I think this is where this idea of, oh yeah, Africa is unsafe comes from, for setting groups. Say, for example, oh, if you're a white person going to Africa, oh my days, you got to be careful because you're not safe there. You'll just be kidnapped and stuff like that. Yes, it happens, but it's not just to not just to white people. As long as you are within the elite and you're useful to trade, then you will be kidnapped. It doesn't matter. So it doesn't matter if you're white, black, as long as you're useful, then you would be kidnapped. So it's important that we try and share the whole information. And if we don't know about it, then we need to ask questions rather than just assume. And finding out stuff like this is absolutely important, because it's just so sad that there is so much misinformation out there, and people just sit there and just buy this nonsense all the time, failing to really analyze and reflect on the rationale behind behaviors. We do it within our own lives. If we can bring these things as close as possible to analyze the decisions and actions that we take and expand that a little bit as well, we can begin. You expand it by trying to understand what's happening across board. It doesn't matter if that's by tribe, by religion, or by race. Just trying to expand by understanding, giving people the opportunity to speak rather than constantly trying to cancel them all the time. You will be amazed as to how much you'll be able to learn, and we will be able to learn from each other. Sad, isn't it? Let me know what you think in the comment section below about this one. I'm mindful that I've just kind of like waffled on for forever now. Oh my days. This is why we've got a podcast where I can do all the waffling there. It is called the Curious Edge podcast, where we try and explore these in more focus on a topic and just explore that topic a lot more. All right, let me know in the comment section below what you think. Until next time, people, please continue to leave your recommendations and comments and likes. If you like what we're all about. It has been Kings. Peace. Bye for now.